The room was dimly lit, the only sound the soft hum of computers and the faint whisper of air conditioning. Rostova and Ben sat huddled over a large wooden table, their eyes fixed on the ancient text laid out before them. The air was thick with tension as they prepared to initiate the untested technique. This was their last hope, the final chance to unlock the secrets of the mysterious text. Rostova's hands moved with precision, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she input the sequence of codes. Ben's eyes were closed, his mind focused on the visions that had been haunting him for weeks. It was a risk, they knew, but they had no other choice. The visions had grown stronger, the images more vivid, and they knew they were running out of time. "Are you ready?" Ben asked, his voice low and steady. "Yes," Rostova replied, her eyes locked on the screen. "Let's do this." The machines sprang to life, the room filled with a soft blue glow. The air seemed to vibrate with energy as the technique began to take hold. Rostova and Ben sat frozen, their eyes fixed on the screen as the ancient text began to reveal its secrets. At first, nothing seemed to happen. Then a low hum filled the room and the screen flickered to life. The text began to shift, the symbols rearranging themselves in a complex pattern. Rostova's eyes widened as she realized the technique was working. "We're getting something," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The screen flickered again and the map began to take shape. The final piece, the one they had been searching for, slowly came into view. Rostova and Ben exchanged a glance, their faces set with determination. "Yes, it's working," Ben said, his eyes locked on the screen. But as the technique continued to reveal the map's secrets, Ben's visions grew stronger. The images flashed before his eyes, a jumbled mix of sound and color. He felt himself being pulled into the vision, the world around him fading away. "Ben," Rostova said, her voice sharp with concern, "what's happening?" The vision was intense, the images flashing before his eyes like a strobe light. He saw a city, its towers reaching for the sky, and then a blast of energy, a wave of destruction that swept through the streets. The vision was clearer now, the details sharper than before. "It's coming," Ben said, his voice strained. "The event, it's closer than we thought." Rostova's face was set with determination. "We have to act fast," she said. "We can't let this happen." "The map, it's the key," Ben said, his eyes locked on the screen. "We have to study it, figure out what it's telling us." Rostova nodded, her eyes scanning the map. "I think I see a pattern," she said. "A sequence of clues that can lead us to the source of the event." Ben's visions were still flashing before his eyes, but he pushed them aside, focusing on the map. He could see it now, a trail of breadcrumbs leading them to the heart of the disaster. "We have to move fast," Rostova said. "We don't have much time." Ben nodded, his mind racing with the implications. They had to stop the event, prevent the catastrophe from happening. The map was their only hope, and they had to follow it, no matter where it led. "Let's get to work," Ben said, his voice firm. "We have a plan to make, and not a lot of time to make it." Rostova nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "We can do this," she said. "We just have to piece together the clues and trust each other." Ben's eyes met hers, and for a moment they just looked at each other. They knew the risks, the danger that lay ahead, but they also knew they had no choice. They had to try, no matter what. Rostova turned back to the screen, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she began to analyze the clues. Ben sat beside her, his eyes fixed on the map as he tried to make sense of the sequence of events. The visions still flashed before his eyes, but he pushed them aside, focusing on the task at hand. "Okay," Rostova said, her voice steady. "I think I've found the first clue. It's a location, a set of coordinates that match a place on the other side of the city." Ben nodded, his eyes locked on the map. "I see it," he said. "It's a warehouse district." "What's the significance of the location?" Rostova's eyes scanned the screen. "I'm not sure yet, but I think it's connected to the energy readings we've been tracking. There's a strange anomaly in the area, something that doesn't match any known energy signature." Ben's visions flickered back to life, the images flashing before his eyes like a strobe light. He saw the warehouse district, the buildings looming large in the darkness. And then he saw a figure, a person standing in the shadows, watching and waiting. "I see something," Ben said, his voice low. "A figure, someone who's connected to the event." Rostova's eyes met his, a spark of excitement in her gaze. "What do you see?" she asked. Ben closed his eyes, focusing on the vision. "The figure is standing in the warehouse district near the location of the first clue. I think they're waiting for something or someone." Rostova nodded, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "I think I can track the energy signature, see if it leads us to the figure." The screen flickered to life, the map shifting as Rostova worked her magic. Ben watched, his eyes fixed on the screen as the clues began to fall into place. We have to be careful, Rostova said, her voice low. If the figure is connected to the event, they may be dangerous. Ben nodded, his mind racing with the implications. They had to stop the event, prevent the catastrophe from happening, and they had to be careful or they could become the next victims. Let's get moving, Ben said, his voice firm. We don't have much time. Rostova nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. We'll follow the clues, see where they lead us. Ben stood up, his eyes locked on the map. We'll need to be careful, watch our backs. Rostova stood up, her eyes meeting his. We'll be fine, she said. We have each other. Ben nodded, a sense of determination washing over him. They would stop the event no matter what it took. They would follow the clues and they would trust each other. Together, they walked out of the room, the map and the clues their only guide. They knew the risks, the danger that lay ahead, but they also knew they had no choice. They had to try no matter what. The city streets were dark and deserted, the only sound the hum of the traffic in the distance. Ben and Rostova walked quickly, their eyes scanning the surroundings as they made their way to the warehouse district. The visions still flashed before Ben's eyes, the images a jumbled mix of sound and color, but he pushed them aside, focusing on the task at hand. They had to stop the event, prevent the catastrophe from happening, and they had to do it now before it was too late. As they walked, the buildings loomed larger, the shadows cast by the streetlights growing longer and darker. Ben felt a sense of unease, a feeling that they were being watched. He glanced at Rostova, his eyes meeting hers. She felt it too, he could see it in her gaze. They were getting close, Ben thought. They were getting close to the truth. And then, suddenly, they heard a noise, a sound that made them stop in their tracks. It was the sound of footsteps. Echoing through the empty streets, they began to study the map in more detail, Rostova's eyes scanning the symbols and markings, while Ben's visions continued to flash before his eyes, providing a deeper understanding of the clues. The room was quiet, the only sound the soft hum of the computers and the occasional rustle of papers as they worked. As they delved deeper into the map, they started to notice a pattern, a sequence of symbols that seemed to point to a specific location. Rostova's eyes widened as she realized the significance of the markings, and she quickly pointed them out to Ben. Look at this, she said, her finger tracing the symbols on the screen. This sequence of markings, it's a map reference pointing to a specific location. Ben's eyes locked onto the symbols, and he felt a surge of excitement. Where does it point to, he asked, his voice low and urgent. Rostova's fingers flew across the keyboard, inputting the coordinates into the computer. The screen flickered to life, displaying a 3D image of the location. Ben's eyes widened as he realized the significance of the location. It's an old research facility, he said, his voice filled with excitement. I've heard of it, it's been abandoned for years. Rostova's eyes met his, a look of determination on her face. That's where we need to go, she said. The map is pointing to that location, and I think that's where we'll find the source of the event. Ben nodded, his mind racing with the implications. They had to move fast, gather their equipment, and get to the facility as soon as possible. The visions were still flashing before his eyes, but he pushed them aside, focusing on the task at hand. Let's get moving, he said, his voice firm. We have a long way to go and not a lot of time to waste. Rostova nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. We'll need to be careful, she said. We don't know what we're up against and we can't afford to make any mistakes. Ben's eyes met hers and he felt a surge of confidence. We'll be okay, he said. We have each other and we have the map. We can do this. The room was quiet for a moment, the only sound the soft hum of the computers. Then Rostova stood up, her eyes locked on Ben's. Let's get to work, she said, her voice firm. We have a plan to make and not a lot of time to make it. Ben nodded, a sense of determination washing over him. They were in this together and they would see it through no matter what. The fate of the city and possibly the world hung in the balance and they were the only ones who could save it. As they started to make their plan, Ben's visions continued to flash before his eyes, providing a deeper understanding of the clues and the danger that lay ahead. But he pushed them aside, focusing on the task at hand and the long journey that lay ahead. The research facility was a long way off and they would have to navigate through treacherous terrain to get there. But Ben and Rostova were determined, driven by a sense of purpose and a desire to save the city from the impending disaster. They worked tirelessly, gathering their equipment and studying the map, trying to anticipate every possible obstacle that lay ahead. The hours ticked by, the tension building as they realized the enormity of their task. But they didn't give up, driven by a fierce determination to succeed. They knew the risks, the danger that lay ahead, but they also knew they had no choice. They had to try no matter what, As the night wore on, they finally had a plan, a detailed map of the route they would take and the obstacles they would face. They were ready, or at least as ready as they could be. The question was, would it be enough? Only time would tell. The next few hours were a blur of activity as Rostova and Ben pored over the map, analyzing the clues and piecing together a plan. They worked in silence, their minds focused on the task at hand. The only sound was the soft hum of the computers and the occasional rustle of papers. As they worked, Ben's visions continued to flash before his eyes, but he learned to control them, using the images to guide their plan. Rostova's expertise was invaluable, her knowledge of the ancient text and the map's symbolism helping to unlock the secrets of the clues. The room was filled with a sense of urgency, the clock ticking away as they worked to prevent the disaster. But despite the pressure, they remained calm, their minds focused on the task at hand. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, they had a plan. It was risky, but it was their only hope. They would have to move fast, using all their knowledge and skills to prevent the catastrophe. "We have to go now," Rostova said, her eyes locked on Ben's. "We can't waste any more time." Ben nodded, his mind racing with the implications. They would have to be careful, using all their skills to avoid detection, but they had no choice. They had to try. "Let's do this," Ben said, his voice firm. "We can't let this happen." Rostova nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "We're in this together," she said. "We'll see it through." Together, they stood up, their eyes locked on the map. They took a deep breath, preparing themselves for what lay ahead. And then, with a sense of determination, they set out to prevent the disaster. The next few hours were a blur of activity as they put their plan into action. They moved swiftly, using all their knowledge and skills to stay one step ahead of the danger. Ben's visions continued to guide them, the images flashing before his eyes like a beacon in the darkness. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, they reached the heart of the disaster. It was a massive machine, its towers reaching for the sky like a giant metal beast. The air was thick with energy, the machine humming with power. "We have to shut it down," Rostova said, her eyes locked on the machine. "We can't let it activate." Ben nodded, his mind racing with the implications. They would have to be careful, using all their skills to disable the machine, but they had no choice. They had to try. With a sense of determination, they set to work, using all their knowledge and skills to shut down the machine. The air was thick with tension as they worked, the clock ticking away with seconds to spare. And then, just as they were about to succeed, everything went wrong. The machine lurched to life, its towers glowing with energy. Ben's visions flashed before his eyes, the images a jumbled mix of sound and color. "No," Rostova said, her voice sharp with concern. "We're too late." But Ben was undeterred. He used all his strength, his mind focused on the task at hand. And then, in a burst of energy, the machine shut down, its towers falling silent. "They did it," Rostova said, her eyes locked on Ben's. "We prevented the disaster." Ben nodded, his mind racing with the implications. They had saved the world, preventing a catastrophe of epic proportions. But as they stood there, basking in the glow of their success, Ben's visions flashed before his eyes once more. "It's not over," Ben said, his voice low and mysterious. "There's something more, something bigger." Rostova's eyes narrowed, her mind racing with the implications. "What do you mean?" she asked. But Ben just smiled, his eyes glinting with a hint of mystery. "I'm not sure," he said, "but I think we're just getting started." And with that, they walked away from the machine, their eyes locked on the horizon, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The world was safe for now. But Ben's visions hinted at a larger truth, a truth that would change everything. The adventure was far from over.